The zip ties cut into Sarah's wrists as they dragged her into the abandoned warehouse. 3 men in tactical gear surrounded her, their faces hidden behind black masks. The leader, a stocky man with dead eyes, circled her like a predator sizing up prey. "You picked the wrong person to kidnap, lady." Marcus stepped closer, his boots echoing in the empty space. "We know you were asking questions about our operation downtown." "Big mistake." Sarah kept her breathing steady, cataloging every detail. Exit points, weapon locations, the slight limp in the guard by the door. Her captors had no idea they had just made the worst decision of their lives. The tall one, Rodriguez, laughed as he checked his pistol. "Look at her, Marcus. She thinks someone's coming to save her. Nobody even knows you're missing yet. Sweetheart. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Are you somewhere safe? Maybe at home? Or are you in a place where people like Marcus and Rodriguez might actually exist?" Because what happened next in that warehouse would change everything these men thought they knew about power. Sarah's silence seemed to irritate Marcus more. He grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her to look at him. "When I ask you a question, you answer. Who sent you to spy on us?" The warehouse felt colder as evening approached. Broken windows cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Rodriguez moved to her left side while the third man, Jenkins, positioned himself behind her chair. They had done this before, these three. Their movements showed practiced coordination and intimidation. Marcus pulled out a knife, the blade catching what little light filtered through the dirty glass. "Maybe you need some motivation to start talking." He traced the weapon along her cheek, applying just enough pressure to make his point clear. Sarah's pulse remained steady. In her mind, she was already 3 moves ahead, calculating angles and timing. These men saw a helpless woman tied to a chair. They had no concept of what 17 years in naval special warfare had taught her about surviving impossible situations. Rodriguez stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Boss, maybe we should try a more direct approach. Some people only understand pain." The moment hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Sometimes the direct approach is best." He raised his hand, fingers spread wide. Sarah watched the hand coming toward her face and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, not panic, something far more dangerous. Something these 3 men were about to learn had been forged in the crucible of operations they could never imagine. The slap echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stepped back, flexing his fingers, satisfied with the red mark blooming across Sarah's cheek. Rodriguez chuckled from his position by the wall. Jenkins shifted his weight behind her chair, waiting for tears that would never come. Sarah turned her head slowly back to center, her dark eyes meeting Marcus's gaze. No flinch, no cry, no pleading, just a look that made something primal in his brain whisper warnings he chose to ignore. "Feel like talking now." Marcus grabbed another chair and sat down facing her, confident in his control of the situation. "Or do you need another reminder of who's in charge here?" Sarah's voice came out steady, almost conversational. "You just made a mistake." Rodriguez laughed louder. "Oh, she's threatening us now. That's rich. Lady, you're tied to a chair in the middle of nowhere. We can make you disappear and nobody would ever find the body." The zip ties around Sarah's wrists had been cutting into her skin, but now she tested them differently. Not struggling against them, but feeling for the exact pressure point. 17 years of escape and evasion training had taught her that every restraint had a weakness. Marcus leaned forward, his breath hot against her face. "The only mistake here was you sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." He reached out to grab her chin again, to reassert his dominance. Sarah moved. The chair tilted backward as she used the momentum to drive her knee upward. The impact caught Marcus directly under the chin, snapping his head back with a wet crack. Blood sprayed from his bitten tongue as he toppled backward, his chair clattering across the concrete. Rodriguez was already reaching for his weapon when Sarah's feet hit the ground. The zip ties snapped as she twisted her wrists in a motion that would have been impossible for anyone without specialized training. Jenkins grabbed for her shoulders from behind. Sarah ducked low and drove her elbow backward into his solar plexus. The air rushed out of Jenkins in a whoosh as he doubled over. She spun around, grabbed his head with both hands, and brought her knee up to meet his face. Cartilage crunched. Rodriguez had his pistol halfway out of its holster when Sarah's foot connected with his wrist. The gun skittered across the floor into the shadows. His eyes went wide as he finally began to understand what they were dealing with. "This isn't possible," Rodriguez gasped, cradling his probably broken wrist. "You're just some office worker asking questions." Marcus was struggling to his feet, blood running down his chin, his earlier confidence completely shattered. He looked at Sarah standing free among the scattered furniture and broken zip ties, and for the first time since they had grabbed her off the street, he felt genuine fear. Sarah wiped a small trickle of blood from the corner of her mouth where his slap had split her lip. Her movements were controlled, economical, like a predator that had just awakened from a long sleep. Jenkins was on his knees, both hands covering his ruined nose, making small whimpering sounds. Rodriguez backed against the wall, his good hand fumbling for something, anything that might give him an advantage. The warehouse felt different now. The shadows seemed deeper, the air thicker with tension. What had been their domain, their place of power, had become something else entirely. A cage they had locked themselves in with someone far more dangerous than they could have imagined. Marcus tried to reassert control, his voice shaking slightly. "There are 3 of us and 1 of you. You might have gotten lucky, but this isn't over." Sarah's smile was cold as winter steel. "You're right. This isn't over." Marcus wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes never leaving Sarah. The taste of copper and the throb in his jaw were sharp reminders that their simple interrogation had gone catastrophically wrong. Jenkins was still on his knees, crimson seeping between his fingers from his shattered nose. Rodriguez pressed himself against the concrete wall, his broken wrist cradled against his chest. "Boss, we need to get out of here. This woman isn't what we thought." Sarah stood in the center of the warehouse, her posture relaxed but ready. The torn zip ties lay at her feet like discarded snakeskin. She rolled her shoulders once, working out the stiffness from being restrained, and the simple movement made all 3 men flinch. Marcus tried to salvage his authority. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of self-defense classes you took, but you're still outnumbered. We can end this right now if you just answer our questions." The laugh that escaped Sarah's lips was soft, almost musical. It carried no humor, only the kind of cold amusement that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "Self-defense classes. That's what you think this is." Jenkins finally looked up from his ruined face, blood streaming down his shirt. "What are you?" His voice came out thick and nasal through his broken nose. Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was an interesting specimen. "The kind of person your bosses should have warned you never touch." Rodriguez's good hand was shaking as he reached into his jacket pocket. Sarah's eyes tracked the movement with predatory focus. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "Go ahead," Sarah said quietly. "Call for backup. Call your friends. Call whoever you think can help you." The certainty in her voice made Rodriguez hesitate. Marcus looked between his injured men and the woman who had just demolished their carefully planned operation with nothing but her bare hands. Something was very wrong here. Sarah took a step forward. All 3 men immediately stepped back. Marcus's throat felt dry. "Who are you?" Sarah's smile widened slightly, and for the first time, they caught a glimpse of something that made their blood run cold. The kind of confidence that came from walking through hell and coming out the other side stronger. Rodriguez's phone slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered on the concrete. The sound echoed through the warehouse like breaking glass. Jenkins tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him properly. Marcus reached behind his back, fingers closing around the grip of a backup pistol he kept tucked in his waistband. Sarah saw the movement and shook her head slowly. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The gun came out anyway. Marcus's survival instincts had finally overridden his pride, and he pointed the weapon at Sarah with hands that shook only slightly. "Now we're back to business. Get back down on your knees." Sarah looked at the pistol, like it was a mildly interesting insect. Marcus, right? That's what Rodriguez called you. Tell me, Marcus, have you ever had someone point a gun at you before? His grip tightened on the weapon. Shut up and get down. Sarah took another step forward, directly into the line of fire. Because the way you're holding that weapon tells me you haven't. Your stance is wrong. Your grip is too tight. And most importantly, you're pointing it at someone who's been shot at by people far more dangerous than you'll ever be. The warehouse seemed to hold its breath. Rodriguez had given up trying to reach his phone and was simply pressed against the wall, watching the standoff with growing horror. Jenkins had managed to crawl behind an overturned crate, leaving a trail of blood droplets across the dusty floor. Marcus's finger hovered over the trigger, but something in Sarah's eyes made him hesitate. She looked like someone who had stared down gun barrels before and lived to tell about it. Your move, Marcus, but choose carefully, because whatever happens next, you're going to have to live with the consequences, assuming you survive them. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger, sweat beading on his forehead despite the warehouse's chill. The pistol wavered slightly in his grip as Sarah continued to move toward him with the unhurried pace of someone taking an evening stroll. I said get down. His voice cracked on the last word. Sarah stopped just outside arm's reach, close enough that Marcus could see the absolute calm in her dark eyes, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of her shampoo, mixed with the metallic tang of blood from her split lip. You know what your problem is, Marcus? Sarah's voice remained conversational, almost gentle. You think that gun makes you dangerous. Rodriguez pressed himself harder against the wall, his broken wrist forgotten as he watched the impossible scene unfold. The woman was standing in the direct line of fire, talking to an armed man like she was discussing the weather. Marcus's hands were shaking harder now. Back off, or I'll shoot. I swear I'll do it. Sarah tilted her head slightly, and her expression shifted to something that made Marcus's mouth go dry. It wasn't fear or anger. It was pity. You've never killed anyone, have you, Marcus? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Rodriguez felt his breath catch in his throat. Behind the overturned crate, Jenkins had gone completely silent, no longer even whimpering about his broken nose. Marcus tried to summon his earlier bravado, but found it had evaporated completely. The woman standing before him seemed to fill the warehouse with her presence, making him feel small and insignificant. Shut up. Just shut up and get down. Sarah's smile was gentle, almost maternal. I have. Killed people, I mean. More than I can count. More than you want to know about. And do you know what I learned from all those experiences? Marcus's trigger finger was white with tension, but he couldn't seem to make himself pull it. Something about her voice, her absolute certainty, was paralyzing him. I learned that amateurs always hesitate. Sarah took another step closer. The gun barrel was now less than 2 feet from her chest. Professionals don't give speeches. They don't make threats. They just act. Rodriguez watched in horrified fascination as Sarah moved within striking distance of Marcus's weapon. His brain screamed that this was impossible, that no one walked toward a loaded gun like it was a minor inconvenience. Marcus tried to step backward, but found himself frozen in place. His training, such as it was, had never covered what to do when your target showed no fear whatsoever. The thing about hesitation, Marcus, is that it's fatal. Sarah's hand moved faster than Rodriguez's eyes could follow. One moment Marcus was pointing a gun at her chest. The next, the weapon was flying through the air, spinning end over end before clattering into the shadows near the far wall. Marcus stared at his empty hands in shock. His wrist felt like it had been hit with a sledgehammer. He looked up to find Sarah standing exactly where she had been, except now she was holding something in her left hand. The magazine from his pistol. When did you? Marcus's voice came out as barely a whisper. Sarah dropped the magazine. It hit the concrete with a metallic clink that seemed to echo forever, while you were deciding whether or not you had the courage to kill me. Rodriguez's legs gave out, and he slid down the wall to sit on the floor, his good hand clutched to his chest. This wasn't possible. People didn't move like that. People didn't disarm, train men like they were taking candy from children. Jenkins peered over the crate, his eyes wide with terror above his blood-stained hands. The woman hadn't even broken a sweat. Marcus backed away, his hands raised defensively. "What are you? Please, just tell us what you are." Sarah looked at the three broken men scattered around the warehouse. Marcus with his bruised jaw and empty hands. Rodriguez collapsed against the wall. Jenkins hiding behind debris like a frightened child. "I'm someone you should never have touched. And more importantly, I'm someone whose friends are going to be very unhappy when they find out what you try to do tonight." Marcus stumbled backward until his spine hit the concrete wall, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. The disarmed pistol lay somewhere in the shadows, useless as a paperweight. Rodriguez had stopped trying to get up, content to remain sitting on the floor in defeat. Jenkins emerged from behind the crate, moving like a man walking to his own execution. Sarah surveyed the warehouse with professional detachment. 3 exits, multiple cover positions, acceptable lighting. Her tactical assessment was automatic, ingrained by years of operations in places far more dangerous than this abandoned building. Marcus found his voice first, though it came out hoarse and shaking. "Who do you work for?" "FBI, DEA, some kind of cop." Sarah's laugh was soft, but carried an edge that made all 3 men flinch. "You're thinking too small, Marcus." Rodriguez struggled to his feet, using the wall for support. His broken wrist hung at an awkward angle, but fear had overridden the pain. "Lady, please. We didn't know. If we had known, we never would have touched you." "Known what?" Sarah's question was quiet, but it carried the weight of a challenge. Jenkins wiped blood from his nose with his sleeve, leaving dark stains on the fabric. "Whatever you are, whatever unit you're from, we're just small time. We don't mess with government people." Sarah walked over to where Marcus's pistol had landed, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. She picked up the weapon, checked the chamber with practiced efficiency, and tucked it into her waistband. Marcus watched her handle the firearm with the kind of casual competence that spoke of extensive training. "Government, that's military movement. You're military." Sarah turned back to face them, and for the first time since this began, she allowed a hint of her true nature to show through. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture shifted slightly, becoming more rigid. Her expression hardened into something that belonged on a battlefield. Rodriguez's eyes widened as he recognized the transformation. "Oh God, you're not just military, you're special operations." The warehouse suddenly felt much smaller. Marcus pressed himself harder against the wall, wishing he could disappear into the concrete. Jenkins had gone pale beneath the blood covering his face. Sarah's voice carried a new authority, the kind that came from leading men and women into impossible situations and bringing them home alive. "You kidnapped me off the street. You brought me to this warehouse. You tied me to a chair, and then you made the mistake of putting your hands on me." Marcus's throat worked soundlessly for several seconds before he managed to speak. "We didn't know. How could we know?" Sarah stepped closer to the group, and all 3 men instinctively huddled together like prey animals sensing a predator. "Because people like me don't advertise what we do. We blend in. We look normal. We act normal. Until someone gives us a reason not to." Rodriguez was shaking his head frantically. "This is all wrong. You were supposed to be some civilian asking questions about our business. Some corporate spy or investigative reporter." Sarah's smile held no warmth. "Corporate spy. That's your intelligence network. 3 guys in tactical gear grabbing random people off the street because they asked the wrong questions." Jenkins tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The warehouse walls seemed to be closing in around them. "Ma'am, please. We'll disappear. You'll never see us again. Just let us walk away." "Walk away." Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried clearly in the empty space. "After you assaulted a federal operator, after you committed kidnapping, unlawful detention, and battery against someone with a security clearance you can't even imagine." Marcus felt his knees weaken. Federal operator. Security clearance. The woman they had grabbed wasn't just military. She was something much worse for them. Rodriguez was crying now, tears mixing with the blood on his face. "We're dead. We're all dead. Sarah looked at the three broken men and felt something almost like sympathy. Almost. You're not dead, but your lives as you knew them are over. Because in about 10 minutes, this warehouse is going to be filled with people who take a very dim view of what you've done tonight. The sound of approaching vehicles could be heard in the distance, growing steadily louder. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to remember what his life had been like an hour ago, before they had made the worst mistake of their criminal careers. The rumble of heavy vehicles grew louder until it shook the warehouse windows in their frames. Marcus pressed his face against the dirty glass and felt his stomach drop. Black SUVs surrounded the building, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk like searchlights. Men in tactical gear poured out of the vehicles with military precision. Rodriguez had given up all pretense of dignity and was openly sobbing. How many of them are there? Sarah checked her watch with casual indifference. Probably a full team. Maybe two. They don't like to take chances when one of their people goes missing. Jenkins crawled closer to the wall, as if the concrete could somehow protect him from what was coming. Missing. You were missing. Sarah pulled out a small device from her pocket, something that looked like a modified cell phone. She pressed a button and spoke clearly into it. Overwatch, this is Phantom 7. Package secure. 3 hostiles contained. Ready for extraction. The response came immediately through a speaker that filled the warehouse with crisp, professional voices. Copy that, Phantom 7. Breacher teams in position. Are you clear of the targets? Affirmative. Targets are docile and ready for processing. Marcus felt his bladder threaten to release. Phantom 7. That wasn't a name. That was a call sign. The kind of call sign that belonged to people who didn't officially exist. The warehouse's main door exploded inward with a thunderous crash. Smoke grenades rolled across the floor, filling the space with thick gray clouds. Through the haze came the sound of boots on concrete and shouted commands. Down on the ground. Hands visible. Do not move. Marcus, Rodriguez, and Jenkins threw themselves flat on the concrete without hesitation. The voice carried absolute authority, the kind that made compliance automatic and immediate. Sarah walked calmly through the smoke toward the breach point. Dark figures in full tactical gear materialized around her like shadows given form. Night vision goggles, assault rifles, body armor that looked like it could stop a tank round. Phantom 7, report. The team leader's voice was crisp and professional. 3 hostiles kidnapped me approximately 90 minutes ago. Brought me here for interrogation. Physical assault occurred. I neutralized the immediate threat and contained them pending your arrival. Injuries to your person. Minimal. Split lip from impact. No medical attention required. Marcus raised his head slightly and immediately regretted it. The tactical team had spread throughout the warehouse with clockwork precision. Red laser dots danced across every surface. Professional soldiers who moved like they had done this 1,000 times before. One of the operators knelt beside Rodriguez, checking his broken wrist with practiced efficiency. This one needs medical attention. Compound fracture. Another examined Jenkins's shattered nose. This one too. Significant nasal trauma. Sarah watched the team work with obvious satisfaction. They're small-time criminals who thought they could intimidate a federal asset. Poor intelligence gathering on their part. The team leader approached Marcus, who was still pressed flat against the concrete. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You're under arrest for kidnapping a federal officer, assault on a federal officer, and violation of the Espionage Act. You have the right to remain silent. Espionage Act. Marcus felt the words hit him like physical blows. They had grabbed someone so far above their clearance level that even touching her was treason. Rodriguez was loaded onto a stretcher, his broken wrist secured in a field splint. Through his tears, he kept repeating the same phrase over and over. We didn't know. We didn't know. Jenkins was next, his ruined face covered with emergency bandages. The medic treating him shook his head grimly. Whoever did this knew exactly how to cause maximum damage without permanent injury. Sarah overheard the comment and allowed herself a small smile. 17 years of training had taught her the difference between neutralizing a threat and creating unnecessary casualties. The team leader handed Sarah a clean field jacket to replace her torn clothing. Transport is standing by. Phantom 7. Debrief in 30 minutes. Copy that. She looked back at the 3 men being loaded into separate vehicles. Make sure they understand the classification level of what happened here tonight. Already briefed, ma'am. They'll be processed through the appropriate channels. As the convoy prepared to leave, Marcus caught one final glimpse of Sarah through the window of his transport vehicle. She stood in the warehouse doorway, silhouetted against the interior lights, looking like exactly what she was. A weapon in human form that these 3 fools had been stupid enough to point at themselves. The federal building's interrogation rooms were stark and clinical, designed to strip away any sense of comfort or familiarity. Marcus sat across from Agent Harrison, a thin man with steel-gray eyes who had been asking the same questions for the past 2 hours. Tell me again about the woman you kidnapped. Harrison's pen hovered over his notepad, though Marcus suspected everything was being recorded anyway. Marcus's wrist was handcuffed to the metal table, his other hand free to gesture helplessly. We thought she was some corporate spy, someone asking too many questions about our operation. We never imagined she was government. Agent Harrison consulted a thick file folder. According to our records, you approached Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell outside a coffee shop at 1400 hours. You forced her into a vehicle at gunpoint. You transported her to an abandoned warehouse, and then you physically assaulted her. Lieutenant Commander. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Navy. Agent Harrison's expression remained neutral. Tell me about the assault. Marcus looked down at his hands, remembering the moment everything went wrong. I slapped her. Across the face. Hard. She just sat there afterward, looking at me like I'd signed my own death warrant. And what happened next? She broke free, destroyed all 3 of us in about 30 seconds. Rodriguez's wrist, Jenkins's nose, my jaw. Then she disarmed me like I was a child playing with toys. Harrison made a note in the margin of his file. Did she identify herself at any point during the encounter? Not directly, but the way she moved, the way she talked about killing people. We knew she wasn't civilian. And when her backup arrived, they called her Phantom 7. Agent Harrison closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. Mr. Marcus, do you understand the gravity of what you've done? Marcus met his eyes reluctantly. We kidnapped a Navy officer. Not just any Navy officer. Harrison's voice carried a weight that made the room feel smaller. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell is a Navy SEAL. Tier 1 operator. She's completed 4 deployments to classified locations. Her service record is so heavily redacted that even I don't have full clearance to read it. Navy SEAL. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought about the woman tied to that chair, how calm she had remained even when he raised his hand to strike her. A Navy SEAL. They had kidnapped and assaulted a Navy SEAL. Harrison continued in the same matter-of-fact tone. Her last operation was a counterterrorism mission that saved approximately 200 civilian lives. The operation before that involved neutralizing a weapons trafficking network that spanned 3 countries. Before that, she spent 6 months undercover in a hostile nation gathering intelligence that prevented a major terrorist attack on American soil. Marcus felt sick. Each word was another nail in his coffin. We had no idea. The Phantom call sign is reserved for SEAL operators who have demonstrated exceptional capability in deep cover operations. There are currently 7 active Phantom operators in the entire United States military. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell is Phantom 7. Rodriguez was in the next room, his broken wrist in a proper cast now, facing Agent Kelly, a woman whose reputation for thorough interrogations was legendary. The pain medication made everything feel distant and surreal. She moved like liquid death. Rodriguez's voice was thick with medication and defeat. 1 second I was reaching for my gun, the next I was on the ground with a shattered wrist. I've never seen anything like it. Agent Kelly reviewed her own set of files. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's hand-to-hand combat ratings are classified at the highest levels. Her marksmanship scores have broken several military records. Her psychological evaluation lists her as having ice water in her veins and the moral flexibility necessary for the most difficult operations. Rodriguez stared at the cast on his arm. We grabbed the wrong person. You grabbed someone who has killed enemy combatants in 12 different countries. Someone who has been shot, stabbed, blown up, and tortured by professional interrogators. Someone who considers what you did to her a minor inconvenience compared to a typical Tuesday in her career. Down the hall, Jenkins sat with his rebuilt nose covered in bandages, facing Agent Torres. The medical team had done excellent work, but his face would never be quite the same. She knew exactly where to hit me. Jenkins's voice was muffled by the bandages. Not too hard, not too soft. Just enough to put me down without permanent damage. That takes skill. Agent Torres nodded grimly. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell is trained in non-lethal neutralization techniques. The fact that all three of you are alive and relatively intact demonstrates considerable restraint on her part. Jenkins touched his bandaged nose gingerly. Restraint. In her world, Mr. Jenkins, restraint means she decided you weren't worth killing. Based on her operational history, that decision probably saved your lives. Navy SEALs are not typically known for taking prisoners during combat operations. The weight of that statement settled over Jenkins like a burial shroud. They had assaulted someone who could have killed all three of them without breaking a sweat, and she had chosen mercy instead. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as news of the case spread through the legal community. 3 civilians had kidnapped and assaulted a Navy SEAL. The story was so unprecedented that it drew attention from the highest levels of military and civilian law enforcement. Marcus sat in the defendant's holding area, his court-appointed attorney reviewing a file thick enough to serve as a doorstop. The charges kept growing as federal prosecutors discovered new violations. Your case has attracted attention from the Pentagon. Attorney Williams looked grim as he flipped through the paperwork. They're treating this as a matter of national security. Marcus stared at the concrete wall. National security. 3 weeks ago, he was running a small-time smuggling operation. Now he was facing charges that carried life sentences. The preliminary hearing revealed the scope of their mistake. Federal Prosecutor Janet Shun stood before Judge Morrison with a presentation that made the courtroom fall silent. Your Honor, the defendants kidnapped Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, a Tier 1 Special Operations officer with top-secret clearance. Her current assignment involves counterterrorism operations that directly impact American lives overseas. Judge Morrison reviewed the classification documents with obvious concern. Counselor, are you suggesting that this kidnapping could have compromised ongoing operations? Prosecutor Chen nodded gravely. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was scheduled to deploy on a classified mission within 72 hours of the kidnapping. The delay caused by this incident required the mission to be postponed and potentially compromised operational security. The defense attorneys exchanged worried glances. Compromising military operations elevated their clients' crimes to levels that carried mandatory minimum sentences measured in decades. Rodriguez watched the proceedings from his wheelchair, his broken wrist still healing. His attorney had already advised him that cooperation was his only hope for avoiding a life sentence. The kidnapping charge alone carries 25 years to life. Attorney Martinez spoke quietly so the prosecutors couldn't overhear. The assault on a federal officer adds another 15 years. The potential compromise of classified operations could add terrorism enhancements. Rodriguez felt his world collapse. Terrorism enhancements. They had gone from small-time criminals to potential terrorists because they had grabbed the wrong woman off the street. Jenkins sat in the third defendant chair, his rebuilt nose a constant reminder of his encounter with Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. The medical bills alone had bankrupted him, but that was the least of his problems now. The prosecutor continued her presentation with methodical precision. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's service record includes multiple citations for valor, including a Silver Star for actions during a classified operation that saved American civilian lives. Her psychological profile indicates she showed remarkable restraint during this incident. Judge Morrison looked up from the documents. Restraint, Counselor. Yes, Your Honor. Based on her training and operational history, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell could have killed all three defendants within seconds of being assaulted. Her decision to use non-lethal force demonstrates professional discipline that likely saved their lives. The courtroom was silent as the implications sank in. The three defendants had not only committed serious federal crimes, they had done so against someone who had chosen not to kill them when she easily could have. Marcus felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. He remembered the calm look in Sarah's eyes after he had slapped her, the way she had moved with such controlled precision. She could have killed him, should have killed him, according to her training. But she hadn't. The judge addressed the defendants directly. Do you understand the severity of your actions? You kidnapped and assaulted a decorated military officer who has dedicated her life to protecting American citizens. Your crime has potentially compromised national security operations. Marcus tried to speak, but no words came out. Rodriguez managed a weak nod from his wheelchair. Jenkins kept touching his rebuilt nose, a nervous habit he had developed since the incident. Prosecutor Chun presented the government's position. Your Honor, we recommend that bail be denied for all three defendants. They have demonstrated a willingness to use violence against federal personnel and pose a continued threat to national security. The defense attorneys made half-hearted arguments for bail, but everyone in the courtroom knew it was futile. Judge Morrison denied bail without hesitation. As the defendants were led back to their cells, Marcus caught a glimpse of a woman in dress blues sitting in the gallery. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell had come to watch the proceedings. Her split lip had healed completely, leaving no trace of their encounter except in the nightmares that haunted all three men. She looked exactly like what she was, a professional warrior who had shown them mercy they didn't deserve. Her presence in the courtroom was a reminder that their victims weren't just statistics or case numbers. They were real people who had earned the right to walk the streets without fear of being kidnapped by criminals too stupid to recognize the difference between a civilian and a Navy SEAL. The bailiff's voice echoed through the courthouse as the session ended. Court is adjourned. The defendants will remain in federal custody pending trial. Marcus realized that his old life was over. Whatever happened next, he would spend the rest of his years paying for the moment he had raised his hand against someone who had sworn an oath to protect people like him. The irony was not lost on him. He had assaulted someone whose job was to keep Americans safe, and now American justice would ensure he never hurt anyone again. The Pentagon briefing room was secured at the highest classification levels as Admiral Thompson reviewed Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's service record with the Joint Chiefs. The kidnapping incident had triggered a comprehensive security review of all Tier 1 operators. Gentlemen, we need to understand how three civilians managed to identify and target one of our most valuable assets. Admiral Thompson's voice carried the weight of decades in naval intelligence. General Hayes consulted his copy of the classified file. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's cover identity was airtight. Corporate consultant specializing in logistics optimization. No obvious military connections. How did they select her as a target? The investigation had revealed the disturbing answer. Intelligence Officer Captain Rodriguez, no relation to the kidnapper, presented his findings to the assembled leadership. Sir, it appears they didn't select her specifically. They were conducting surveillance on anyone asking questions about their smuggling operation. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's cover required her to gather intelligence on shipping routes, which brought her to their attention. Admiral Thompson shook his head grimly. Random chance. Our most decorated SEAL operator was compromised by random chance. The file they were reviewing painted a picture of extraordinary service. Sarah Mitchell had volunteered for SEAL training at age 22, becoming only the third woman to complete the program successfully. Her psychological evaluations described someone with exceptional mental resilience and moral clarity. General Hayes read from the performance reports. First deployment to Afghanistan, age 24. Led a team that extracted 12 American hostages from a Taliban compound. 0 casualties. Awarded Navy Cross. The citations continued in chronological order, each more impressive than the last. Second deployment involved a 6-month deep cover operation in Syria, posing as a humanitarian aid worker while gathering intelligence on terrorist networks. Her information led to the prevention of 3 major attacks on American soil. Captain Rodriguez highlighted specific achievements. Her marksmanship scores have never been equaled. Maximum possible rating in every weapon system. Her hand-to-hand combat certifications include instructor-level ratings in 4 different martial arts disciplines. Admiral Thompson paused at a particular entry in the file. The Mogadishu incident. Tell me about that operation. The room fell silent. The Mogadishu incident was legendary within special operations circles, though it remained classified to the general public. General Hayes took the lead on that briefing. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell and her team were inserted into a hostage situation. 37 American civilians held by a warlord with connections to international terrorism. The compound was considered impregnable. The operation had taken place 2 years earlier, but the details still made seasoned military officers shake their heads in amazement. She went in alone, sir. Full stealth insertion under cover of darkness. Neutralized 14 armed guards without raising an alarm. Extracted all 37 hostages through a route she improvised on site. 0 casualties among the civilians. Admiral Thompson studied the mission photographs. Satellite imagery showed the compound before and after the operation. The precision required to move 37 people through hostile territory without detection was almost superhuman. Captain Rodriguez added the psychological assessment from after that mission. The evaluating psychiatrist noted that Lieutenant Commander Mitchell showed no signs of post-traumatic stress, despite the extreme nature of the operation. Her psychological profile indicates someone who thrives under pressure that would break most operators. The room contemplated the implications. This was the woman that Marcus, Rodriguez, and Jenkins had kidnapped and assaulted. Someone who had single-handedly rescued 37 Americans from certain death, who had prevented terrorist attacks that could have killed hundreds. General Hayes continued reading from the file. Her current assignment involves tracking weapons trafficking networks with connections to state-sponsored terrorism. The intelligence she gathers directly impacts Homeland Security operations. Admiral Thompson closed the file and looked around the table at his fellow officers. And 3 small-time criminals grabbed her off the street because she was asking questions about shipping containers. The irony was staggering. Sarah Mitchell spent her professional life hunting international terrorists and weapons dealers. Her cover work involved investigating exactly the kind of smuggling operations that Marcus and his associates were running. Captain Rodriguez presented the final piece of the puzzle. Sir, our investigation revealed that Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was already building a case against their organization. Her questions weren't random curiosity. She was gathering evidence for a federal prosecution that would have shut down their entire network. They kidnapped the federal agent who was investigating them. Admiral Thompson's voice carried a note of dark humor. They kidnapped their own prosecutor. The security footage from the coffee shop showed the moment everything went wrong. Sarah Mitchell, in her corporate consultant disguise, sitting at a small table reviewing shipping manifests on her laptop. Marcus approaching her table with 2 associates backing him up. General Hayes watched the footage with professional interest. Look at her body language. Even in civilian clothes, even maintaining her cover identity, she's cataloging threats and escape routes from the moment they approach. The video showed Sarah's subtle shift in posture as Marcus sat down uninvited. Her hands moved slightly closer to her concealed weapon. Her eyes tracked the positions of his associates. Even compromised and outnumbered, she was already planning her response. Admiral Thompson paused the video at the moment they escorted her out of the coffee shop. She's allowing herself to be taken. She could have neutralized all 3 of them right there in public, but she chose to protect civilian bystanders. The decision to go quietly with her kidnappers had been tactical, not surrender. Sarah Mitchell had calculated that compliance would move the threat away from innocent civilians and give her better options for response. Captain Rodriguez highlighted the final irony. Sir, if they had simply ignored her, her investigation would have taken months to build a prosecutable case. By kidnapping her, They handed federal prosecutors everything they needed to dismantle the entire organization within hours. The SEAL training facility at Coronado was buzzing with unusual activity. Word had spread through the special operations community about the incident with Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, and today's demonstration had drawn observers from across the military hierarchy. Master Chief Petty Officer Williams stood before an audience of Navy brass, federal agents, and select members of Congress who had security clearance to witness classified training operations. The three criminals who had assaulted a Navy SEAL had inadvertently triggered a review of SEAL capabilities that would be briefed to the highest levels of government. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to see why attacking a Navy SEAL is considered one of the most dangerous mistakes a criminal can make. Master Chief Williams gestured toward the obstacle course that had been set up specifically for this demonstration. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell emerged from the preparation area in full combat gear. Her face was focused, professional, showing no trace of the split lip that had healed weeks ago. The assembled observers studied her with newfound respect, knowing what she had endured and how she had responded. Admiral Thompson addressed the audience from the observation platform. The scenario you're about to witness replicates the conditions Lieutenant Commander Mitchell faced during her kidnapping. 3 armed opponents, confined space, initial disadvantage. The demonstration area had been configured to match the warehouse layout exactly. Concrete walls, scattered obstacles, poor lighting. 3 special operations instructors, each with decades of combat experience, took their positions as the opposing force. Instructor Martinez checked his weapon one final time. We've been briefed on exactly what happened that night. Our job is to replicate the tactics used by the kidnappers and show how a trained SEAL responds to civilian threats. Sarah moved to the starting position, her hands secured behind her back with zip ties identical to those used in the warehouse. The instructors positioned themselves around her, weapons drawn, but loaded with simulation rounds that would register hits without causing injury. Master Chief Williams addressed the observers. The exercise begins with Lieutenant Commander Mitchell restrained and outnumbered. The opposing force has been instructed to escalate to physical violence exactly as occurred during the actual incident. Instructor Davis raised his hand and struck Sarah across the face with the same force Marcus had used weeks earlier. The sharp crack echoed through the training facility. Every observer flinched at the sound. Sarah's head snapped to the side from the impact, but her eyes never lost their focus. She turned back to face her attackers with the same cold calm she had shown in the warehouse. Begin. Master Chief Williams's command triggered the demonstration. Sarah dropped backward, using the chair as leverage to drive her knees upward. Instructor Davis, playing the role of Marcus, took the full impact under his chin. His head snapped back, and he staggered away, raising his hand to signal he had been effectively neutralized. The zip ties snapped as Sarah twisted her wrists in a motion too fast for most of the observers to follow. She spun toward Instructor Martinez, grabbed his weapon arm, and delivered a precise strike to his wrist. His simulation weapon clattered to the floor. Instructor Johnson moved to flank her from behind, but Sarah had already sensed his position. Her elbow drove backward into his solar plexus, doubling him over. A controlled knee strike to his face completed the sequence. 15 seconds. Master Chief Williams announced the elapsed time. 3 armed opponents neutralized in 15 seconds by an operator who began the engagement restrained and disadvantaged. Congressman Bradley leaned forward in his seat. That's impossible. No one moves that fast. Admiral Thompson smiled grimly. Congressman, you've just witnessed why Navy SEALs represent the pinnacle of military training. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell executed those techniques with approximately 30% of her actual capability. Sarah stood among the 3 instructors, who were checking their simulated injuries with rueful respect. Her breathing was barely elevated, her movement fluid and controlled. Instructor Martinez rubbed his wrist where she had struck him. Ma'am, I've been teaching combat techniques for 15 years. I've never seen anything executed with that level of precision. Sarah helped Instructor Davis to his feet. The real kidnappers were amateurs. You gentlemen are professionals, which made this demonstration much more challenging than the actual incident. Master Chief Williams addressed the stunned audience. What you've witnessed represents standard response protocols for a Tier 1 operator facing civilian threats. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's actual combat record involves engagements with professionally trained enemy combatants under far more dangerous conditions. Congressman Taylor consulted his briefing notes. Master Chief, the file indicates Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has completed over 40 high-risk operations. How does this incident compare to her typical mission profile? Master Chief Williams exchanged a look with Admiral Thompson before responding. Sir, this kidnapping ranks among the least dangerous situations Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has faced in her career. The Taliban fighters she engaged in Afghanistan were far more capable than these three criminals. The weight of that statement settled over the observers. The woman who had been kidnapped and assaulted was someone who routinely faced enemy combatants with military training, advanced weapons, and tactical support. Sarah demonstrated several additional techniques, showing how she could have escalated the response if necessary. Her movements were economical, precise, devastating. Every strike was calculated to neutralize threats with minimal force. General Hayes watched with obvious admiration. Lieutenant Commander, in your professional assessment, how long would the actual engagement have lasted if you had used maximum force? Sarah considered the question carefully. Sir, against 3 untrained civilians with basic weapons, maximum engagement time would have been approximately 3 seconds. 3 seconds. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus, Rodriguez, and Jenkins had no idea how close they had come to dying in that warehouse. They had assaulted someone who could have killed all 3 of them faster than they could react. The silence in the observation area was deafening. Congressman Bradley sat frozen in his chair, his pen suspended over his notepad where he had stopped writing mid-sentence. The demonstration had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it had fundamentally changed how everyone in the room understood what had happened in that warehouse. Admiral Thompson broke the silence first. Gentlemen, what you've just witnessed is why the 3 defendants are facing life sentences. They didn't just assault a woman. They assaulted a living weapon who chose not to kill them. Congressman Taylor removed his glasses and cleaned them with shaking hands. Admiral, I've been on the Armed Services Committee for 12 years. I thought I understood military capabilities. But this... Sarah stood at attention while the observers processed what they had seen. Her calm professionalism was more unsettling than any display of emotion would have been. She had just demonstrated techniques that could kill 3 men in seconds, and she looked like she was discussing the weather. General Hayes consulted his notes with obvious difficulty. Lieutenant Commander, during the actual incident, what prevented you from using lethal force? Sarah's response was immediate and precise. Sir, the subjects were American civilians on American soil. They posed no threat to national security beyond their assault on my person. Lethal force was not justified under the circumstances. Master Chief Williams stepped forward to address the audience. What Lieutenant Commander Mitchell isn't telling you is that showing this level of restraint under physical assault requires extraordinary discipline. Most operators would have responded with maximum force. FBI Director Collins leaned forward in his seat. Master Chief, are you saying she had to consciously choose not to kill them every second of that encounter? Affirmative, sir. Her training emphasizes immediate threat neutralization. Choosing non-lethal response while under attack goes against years of conditioning designed to keep her alive in combat situations. The implications hit the observers like a physical force. Sarah had been struck across the face by a man who could have easily killed her if she had been a normal civilian. Instead of responding with the lethal techniques that had been drilled into her through years of training, she had consciously chosen mercy. Congressman Bradley found his voice. Lieutenant Commander, what was going through your mind when he hit you? Sarah considered the question carefully. Sir, I was calculating the most efficient way to neutralize 3 threats while ensuring they survive the encounter. The challenge was using enough force to eliminate their capability to harm me while using too little force to cause permanent injury. Agent Harrison from the FBI stood up from his chair. "Ma'am, with respect, that level of precision under stress seems impossible." Sarah's slight smile carried no warmth. "Agent Harrison, I've performed similar calculations while being shot at by enemy combatants armed with automatic weapons. 3 frightened criminals in a warehouse presented a relatively simple tactical problem. The 3 instructors who had participated in the demonstration were nursing their simulated injuries with obvious respect. Instructor Martinez approached the observation area with permission from Master Chief Williams. Sir, I need the record to reflect that Lieutenant Commander Mitchell could have killed me at least 6 different ways during our engagement. Her restraint was the only thing that kept this demonstration non-lethal. Director Collins processed this information with visible difficulty. Instructor, you're saying she was holding back even during this demonstration? Yes, sir. What you witnessed was approximately 10% of her actual capability. We requested that she demonstrate minimal force techniques to protect the safety of the training personnel. The audience exchanged stunned glances. They had just watched what they assumed was a full demonstration of elite military capability, only to learn it was barely a sample of what Sarah could actually do. Admiral Thompson addressed Sarah directly. "Lieutenant Commander, in your professional opinion, how would you classify the threat level posed by your kidnappers?" Sarah's response was matter-of-fact. "Sir, they rank below untrained militia fighters in terms of tactical capability. Their weapons handling was amateur, their situational awareness was poor, and their decision-making was compromised by emotion rather than training." General Hayes shook his head slowly. 3 men with weapons couldn't effectively threaten someone they had tied to a chair. Sarah nodded respectfully. "Sir, restraints are only effective against individuals who lack escape training. The zip ties they use could be defeated by any SEAL operator in under 3 seconds." Master Chief Williams provided additional context for the civilians in the audience. "Gentlemen, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has escaped from professional interrogation facilities operated by enemy intelligence services. Zip ties purchased at a hardware store were never going to contain someone with her training." Congressman Taylor stared at his briefing folder. "The file says she was held for 90 minutes before her team arrived. Why didn't she escape immediately?" Sarah answered without hesitation. "Sir, I was gathering intelligence on their operation while waiting for my backup team to establish a perimeter. My capture provided an opportunity to map their entire criminal network from the inside." The audience realized that even while kidnapped and assaulted, Sarah had been working. She had turned her victimization into an intelligence-gathering opportunity that would ultimately lead to the prosecution of dozens of criminals. Director Collins closed his notepad. "Lieutenant Commander, do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation?" Sarah's response was immediate. "Sir, my only regret is that the incident delayed a scheduled deployment that could have saved American lives overseas. The criminals inadvertently compromised national security by forcing mission postponement." Admiral Thompson stood to address the group. "Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our demonstration. I trust you now understand why the Justice Department is treating this case as a matter of national security rather than simple assault." As the observers filed out of the facility, each carried with them a new understanding of what Marcus, Rodriguez, and Jenkins had actually done. They hadn't just slapped a woman. They had struck someone who could have ended their lives before they realized they were in danger, someone who had chosen mercy over justice, restraint over retribution. The 3 criminals sitting in federal prison had no idea how lucky they were to be alive. 5 years later, Marcus sat in his federal prison cell, staring at a newspaper article about Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell's promotion to commander. The headline Red Navy SEAL receives Distinguished Service Medal for counterterrorism operations. Her photograph showed the same calm eyes that had looked at him across that warehouse, but now they were framed by the insignia of her new rank. Rodriguez wheeled himself into the prison library where Marcus was reading. His wrist had healed poorly during their first months in custody, leaving him with permanent limited mobility. The federal prison's medical care was adequate, but not exceptional. Still reading about her, Rodriguez's voice carried a mixture of respect and resignation. You know, she's probably forgotten we exist by now. Marcus folded the newspaper carefully. I don't think someone like her forgets anything. Every detail gets filed away somewhere in that mind of hers. The article detailed Commander Mitchell's recent operation in Southeast Asia, where she had led a joint task force that dismantled an international weapons trafficking network. 47 arrests across 6 countries. Millions of dollars in illegal weapons confiscated. 3 terrorist plots prevented. Jenkins approached their table, his rebuilt nose slightly crooked despite the excellent work of the federal prison surgeons. His speech was still affected by the damage Sarah had inflicted during those crucial 15 seconds in the warehouse. The counselor wants to see all 3 of us tomorrow. Something about the parole board review. Marcus looked up from the article. Parole review. After 5 years of model behavior, they were finally eligible to present their case for early release. The irony wasn't lost on any of them that their best behavior in prison was motivated by the same fear that had paralyzed them in that warehouse. Rodriguez had become something of a scholar during his incarceration, reading everything he could find about military special operations. His research had given him a comprehensive understanding of exactly what they had encountered that night. Did you know she was in the top 1% of her SEAL class? Rodriguez opened his notebook, filled with meticulous research about Sarah's career. Her marksmanship scores broke records that had stood for 15 years. Marcus nodded grimly. He had read similar information during his own research. Learning about Sarah Mitchell had become an obsession for all 3 men, a way of processing the magnitude of their mistake. Jenkins traced the scar on his rebuilt nose unconsciously. The prison psychologist says we're suffering from a form of survivor's guilt. We know we should be dead, and we can't figure out why we're not. The psychological impact of their encounter had been profound. All 3 men suffered from nightmares, not about violence or death, but about those calm eyes studying them with professional assessment. They dreamed about being evaluated by someone who could have killed them and chose not to. Marcus closed the newspaper and looked at his 2 companions. Tomorrow's parole hearing would determine whether they would serve their full sentences or be released early for good behavior. The irony was that their good behavior had been motivated entirely by the lessons Sarah Mitchell had taught them about the consequences of violence. The next morning, they sat before the parole board in their pressed prison uniforms, facing 5 officials who would decide their fate. Board Chairman Davis reviewed their files with obvious skepticism. Gentlemen, your crime was extraordinary in its severity. You kidnapped and assaulted a decorated military officer whose service to this country deserves our highest respect. Marcus spoke for the group, as he had learned to do during their years inside. Sir, we understand the gravity of what we did. Not just the legal implications, but the moral ones. We attacked someone who had dedicated her life to protecting people like us. Board member Rodriguez, no relation to the defendant, consulted her notes. The victim impact statement from Commander Mitchell is unusual. She recommends clemency for all 3 defendants. The room fell silent. None of the 3 men had known that Sarah had submitted a statement on their behalf. Marcus felt his throat tighten. She recommended clemency. Board Chairman Davis read from the official document. Commander Mitchell states that the defendants showed no signs of malicious intent beyond their criminal activities. She believes their actions were the result of poor judgment rather than inherent evil, and that their punishment has been sufficient to ensure they pose no future threat to society. Rodriguez wiped tears from his eyes. Even after everything we did to her, she's still trying to protect us. The parole board deliberated for less than an hour before returning with their decision. Based on your exemplary behavior during incarceration and the victim's recommendation for clemency, this board grants parole to all 3 defendants under strict supervision. As they walked out of the federal prison 6 months later, Marcus carried a copy of Commander Mitchell's victim impact statement. Her final paragraph had become a source of constant reflection during his remaining time in custody. These 3 men learned an important lesson about the consequences of violence against those who serve our country. Their punishment has served justice, and their rehabilitation suggests they will contribute positively to society upon release. As someone who has sworn to protect American citizens, I believe in giving people the opportunity to become better than their worst moments. Marcus looked up at the sky, breathing free air for the first time in over 5 years. They had kidnapped and assaulted a Navy SEAL, and she had responded by saving their lives twice. Once in that warehouse when she chose not to kill them, and again in that courtroom when she chose to forgive them. So what do you think? Have you ever misjudged someone's capabilities based on their appearance? Have you ever assumed someone was weak or helpless only to discover they were far more capable than you imagined? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes the most dangerous mistake you can make is underestimating the person standing right in front of you. The three men walked toward their new lives, forever changed by 15 seconds with someone who had shown them the difference between strength and violence, between justice and revenge. They had learned the hardest way possible that you should never strike a Navy SEAL, not because of what they might do to you, but because of what you might discover about yourself in the process.